The mound sat alone in the frozen field for so many years that most people stopped noticing it. Children sled down its sides during winter. Cattle grazed around it in summer. And every spring, tall grass grew across the rounded hump until it looked like nothing more than part of the earth itself. Only Eleanor Whitmore treated it differently. She never allowed anyone to dig near it, never planted over it, never explained it. So when she died during the first frost of October, her daughter Clara inherited not only the failing homestead, but the strange mound too. That was the part neighbors laughed about. Your mother finally leave you her dirt pile? Maybe there's buried treasure under there. Could always use it as a root cellar. Clara ignored them at first, mostly because grief left little room for curiosity. The winter after Eleanor's death arrived too quickly. Repairs around the cabin piled up faster than Clara could manage alone. Fence posts leaned. Roof seams leaked. The woodshed sat half empty before November even began. At 19, Clara suddenly understood how fragile a homestead could become once only one pair of hands remained. Still, the mound bothered her. Not emotionally. Practically. Her mother protected it too carefully for it to be meaningless. Clara remembered strange details from childhood. Eleanor carrying supplies there after dark. Snow melting faster around the southern edge each winter. The way her mother always paused beside it during storms, listening almost, as if expecting something beneath the ground to answer. But Eleanor never explained any of it. And now she was gone. The first rail freeze arrived in mid-November. Wind rolled hard across the valley, driving ice beneath cabin doors and frosting window corners by dawn. Clara burned more wood than expected, just trying to keep one room comfortable enough to sleep in. By the second week, she began rationing. Smaller fires, thicker blankets, more layers indoors. That frightened her more than she admitted aloud. Winter had barely started. Then came the note. She found it tucked inside an old flour tin while searching her mother's pantry shelves for anything useful. Only 6 words written in faded ink. When the freeze comes, open it. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. But Clara knew immediately what it meant. The mound. She waited 3 more days before finally walking out there near dusk with a lantern and shovel. Snow crunched beneath her boots as cold settled heavily across the field. The mound rose ahead of her beneath moonlight, smooth and white except for one strange detail. The southern side held less snow than the rest. Exactly like she remembered. Clara brushed frost away carefully near the exposed patch. Then stopped. Wood. Not roots. Not stone. Wood. Her pulse quickened. She cleared more snow, revealing the edge of a heavy timber door nearly invisible beneath packed sod and earth. For a long moment, she simply stared. The mound wasn't natural. It was built. Her mother had hidden an entire structure beneath the field. The door resisted at first when Clara pulled it open. Frozen dirt cracked loose around the frame until finally the heavy timber groaned inward. Warm air touched her face immediately. Not hot. Not cold either. Stable. Impossible. Lantern light revealed narrow stone steps, descending underground. Clara hesitated only a moment before climbing down. The door closed behind her with a dull thud, muting the wind above almost completely. Silence surrounded her. Not empty silence. Protected silence. At the bottom of the steps, the tunnel opened into a buried chamber unlike anything Clara expected. Shelves lined the walls packed with preserved jars, dried herbs, sacks of grain, and neatly stacked firewood kept perfectly dry beneath the earth. Thick timber beams supported the curved ceiling overhead while stone-lined walls disappeared beneath warm lantern glow. And somehow, the room felt alive. Not abandoned. Maintained. Clara moved slowly through the shelter, stunned. There was a cast-iron stove connected to a hidden vent system disappearing upward through the mound. Water barrels lined one corner beside stacked blankets and preserved food enough to survive months underground if necessary. Then she noticed the notebook resting atop a wooden table. Her mother's handwriting covered every page. Not recipes. Not household accounts. Instructions. Ventilation diagrams. Temperature notes. Storage rotations. And one sentence repeated several times throughout the journal. The earth protects what it covers. Clara sat beside the table reading for nearly an hour while the underground warmth settled into her frozen hands. The mound wasn't a shelter built quickly during desperation. It was engineered. Carefully. Deliberately. Her grandfather apparently started it after surviving a devastating freeze decades earlier. Eleanor expanded it slowly over years, improving airflow, drainage, insulation, and food storage each season, all without telling anyone. Because the valley mocked preparation that looked unusual, the journal made that painfully clear. People trust visible houses, one line read. But winter attacks what stands exposed. Clara finally understood why her mother guarded the mound so fiercely. This wasn't storage. It was survival hidden beneath ordinary ground. She returned to the cabin after midnight, carrying only a few supplies and the notebook. But something inside her had changed already. For the first time since Eleanor died, Clara no longer felt entirely alone against winter. The mound existed. Warm, stable, waiting. And over the next week, while storms worsened across the valley, Clara began quietly moving supplies underground. Not everything, only essentials. Food, blankets, extra water, candles. Each trip taught her more about the buried shelter. The earth overhead insulated the entire structure naturally. Temperatures barely shifted no matter how violently the wind howled outside. The curved design redirected meltwater safely downhill through hidden drainage trenches. Most importantly, the underground rooms held warmth unbelievably well. One modest evening fire in the stove stayed trapped for hours, better than the cabin ever managed. Caleb Turner visited unexpectedly during the season's first snowstorm and immediately noticed the difference. "You're burning less wood," he said while thawing snow from his gloves. Clara hesitated, then lied badly. "I've been sealing drafts better." Caleb glanced toward the nearly empty woodshed outside. That shouldn't be enough. He wasn't wrong, because by then Clara spent most nights underground already. Not out of fear, out of comfort. The buried shelter felt safer than the cabin above it. Still, protected, constant. Above ground, winter shifted violently day by day. Below ground, the earth barely seemed aware of the season at all. Then December arrived, and with it came the storm that changed everything. The storm began before dawn. By noon, the valley disappeared beneath blowing white. Wind drove snow sideways hard enough to erase fences completely. Chimneys vanished behind drifting ice. Cabin doors froze shut within hours if left unshoveled. People called it the deep freeze afterward. But during the storm itself, nobody called it anything. They were too busy surviving it. Clara watched the blizzard through the cabin window while the walls groaned softly around her. Cold leaked through the floorboards despite the stove burning hard. Frost thickened along the inside corners of the room. Every gust outside seemed to pull warmth away faster than the fire could replace it. Then she remembered her mother's words. The earth protects what it covers. Before sunset, Clara carried the last of her essentials underground. Food, lanterns, her mother's blankets. By the time darkness swallowed the valley completely, she barred the timbered door at the top of the mound and descended into the buried shelter for good. The difference struck immediately. The wind vanished. Not softened. Gone. Below the frost line, the storm became distant and meaningless. The underground chamber held the same calm temperature it had all week. Lantern light glowed warmly across the stone walls while the small cast-iron stove ticked quietly beside the table. One modest fire kept the entire shelter comfortable. No drafts. No freezing corners. No panic. Clara finally understood. The mound wasn't designed merely to survive winter. It was designed to ignore it. Hours passed underground without fear for the first time since her mother died. Then came the pounding. Faint at first, almost swallowed by the storm overhead. Clara froze. Another knock. Then another. She grabbed the lantern and climbed the stone steps carefully toward the outer door. When she opened it, snow burst inward around Caleb Turner. His face was nearly white from cold. "Our chimney collapsed," he gasped. Mother said, if anyone still had dry wood. Then he stopped, because warm air drifted upward from beneath the earth behind Clara. "And light. And safety. You found it," he whispered. Clara stepped aside immediately. "Get inside before you freeze." Caleb descended slowly into the shelter, staring around in stunned silence. The underground room glowed warmly beneath heavy timber beams, while shelves of preserved food lined the walls untouched by frost. Dry firewood stacked neatly beside the stove. Water barrels remained liquid despite temperatures outside cold enough to crack iron. "It's warmer down here than most cabins. The ground stays stable." Caleb touched one stone wall carefully. "Cold surface. Warm air. How? Clara handed him her mother's notebook. The earth changes slowly. He read silently for several moments before looking around again. She built all this herself? With my grandfather. Another knock interrupted them. Then another. By midnight, 7 more people crowded inside the buried shelter. Mrs. Tolland carrying her grandson wrapped in blankets. Old Mr. Wexler after losing his stove entirely. Even Harlan Pike arrived exhausted after snow buried half his cabin wall. Nobody laughed about the mound anymore. Not while standing alive inside it. The shelter held them all surprisingly well. That was another thing Eleanor planned carefully. Compact spaces retained warmth better. Curved ceilings prevented cold pockets. Thick earth overhead insulated against both temperature loss and wind entirely. Above ground, the storm raged violently. Below ground, the buried shelter remained calm enough for children to sleep. Harlan sat near the stove staring upward at the packed earth ceiling. All these years, he muttered. We thought this was just a hill. Clara looked around the underground room, glowing softly beneath lantern light. So did I. The deep freeze lasted 3 days. 3 endless days of buried roads, frozen livestock, collapsing sheds, and fires burning non-stop across the valley. Yet inside the mound, what lasted longer than expected because heat stayed trapped efficiently beneath the earth. Water remained unfrozen. Air stayed dry and stable through carefully designed ventilation shafts hidden inside the hillside. Everything worked together. Not magically, intelligently. That difference mattered. By the second night, even the skeptical neighbors understood something difficult. Traditional cabins fought winter constantly because they stood exposed above it. The mound simply stepped outside the battle entirely. Caleb realized it first. Your mother didn't build a shelter, he said quietly while studying the curved ceiling overhead. She built a place winter couldn't reach. That sentence spread through the valley after the storm finally broke. People emerged from damaged cabins into a landscape transformed by snow and silence. Several roofs collapsed completely beneath drifting weight. Woodpiles vanished almost entirely in some homes. But the mound still sat quietly in the field exactly as before. Only now people knew what rested beneath it. Warmth, food, survival. Over the following weeks, neighbors visited openly. Not to mock, to learn. How deep should underground rooms be? How did ventilation work? Did earth insulation always stay stable? Could smaller shelters work too? Clara answered patiently, using her mother's journal. The earth insulated naturally below frost depth. Stone retained temperature slowly. Curved underground spaces resisted pressure and drafts better than square rooms. Most importantly, stable warmth mattered more than intense warmth. The valley changed after that winter. Families expanded root cellars large enough for shelter instead of only storage. Some buried food rooms directly into hillsides. Others reinforced underground chambers beside cabins for emergencies. Nobody mocked hidden shelters anymore. The freeze ended that permanently. Spring arrived slowly across the valley. Snow melted from the mound, first along the southern edge, where warmth beneath the earth still touched the surface gently. One evening Caleb stood beside Clara watching sunsets spread gold across the thawing fields. You know what's strange? He asked. What? Your mother spent years protecting something everyone ignored. Clara looked toward the buried doorway hidden beneath grass and melting snow. She wasn't protecting the mound, Clara said softly. She was protecting whoever needed it next. And long after the deep freeze passed into valley memory, travelers still noticed the strange rounded hill sitting alone in the field beyond Clara Whitmore's cabin. Most assumed it was natural. The valley knew better. It was the warmest place for miles. Hidden beneath ordinary earth by a woman who understood winter better than anyone else.